So that's why we're doing it this way, as opposed to a standard kind of a PowerPoint presentation. But this is really not, we're not dealing here in surveyor quality training. What we're doing here is for those of you that are dealing with property descriptions on a somewhat daily basis, that take a look at some of these things and go, you know, oh, well, what am I supposed to do with this? And you end up running down the hall to equalization. We're going to just try to give you some of the basics so that you can be a little bit more confident in coming to at least a few conclusions, and maybe even developing a few new policies for some of your offices on how you handle legal descriptions. So the whole concept of land measurement and document recording obviously goes back centuries. The acre, which is the basic unit of measurement, is something that came about in England back in the 1500s, and they obviously needed a unit of measurement, and they started out by using simply a knotted rope, and everybody had a knotted rope that was the same length, and they used multiples of that for their measurement. It took them 100 years to evolve from the knotted rope to a standard size chain. And that chain was 66 feet in length, and a chain became the unit of measurement. And if you find an old surveyor's chain, you'll find that it's got 100 links, and each link is 8 inches long. Not a common thing, by the way, and they're awfully heavy. The other thing that they used back then as a unit of measurement was something which was called a rod. And the rod is something you will still, to this day, you're not going to very often run into a chain or a link in a legal description, but you very well could see a rod used as a unit of measurement in a modern legal description. They also called rods other things like a perch or a pole or a pike, and who knows where those came from. But a rod as a unit of measurement is 16.5 feet. And one thing that is something that people that work with land descriptions and in treasurer's office, where you're sometimes forfeiting property, might want to keep in mind is that a rod is 16.5 feet, and the multiples of that include 33 feet and 66 feet. 2 rods is 33 feet, and 4 rods is 66, which very coincidentally, 33 and 66 feet wide strips of land, especially if they're long, if they're over maybe 600 feet long, those are very often private roads. So anytime that you see something that is indicating that there's a piece of property that's 1, 2, or 4 rods in width, or that's 33 feet or 66 feet in width, especially if it appears to run along the edge of a piece of property, you're very often there dealing with a private road. And especially if you see something like that in forfeiture, you might want to take a second look at it and maybe consult a tax map to see if more than one property is serviced by that piece of land, and whether or not something like that being foreclosed is going to landlock anybody. Sometimes if you foreclose on a private road or something that multiple people have been using as their access to their property, in a lot of situations, you could very possibly landlock somebody. So most of us grew up back in school with one of these things. Everybody had one of these in their desk. And for what we're doing now, if you have one of these, it's of some value, but it's almost worthless now. Back when we were in school, we were taught that there were north, south, east, and west. But if you look at the degrees here on the compass, you'll see that it starts at 0, and then it runs all the way around to 180, and then another 180 gets you all the way back to 360. Land is not described using that form of compass, and we'll get into what we are using later on. There also is this derivation of it that has this little handy little arm on it. But again, you'll notice that it goes to 180 degrees. And if you see 180 degree or anything north of 90 degrees listed in a land description, then whoever wrote it was not doing any kind of conventional description when they did so. So keep in mind that we're no longer dealing with 0 to 360 degrees when we're describing land. We'll get into the actual details of what we are using in our description in a minute here. But before we get there, we're going to zoom all the way out on describing land. And we're going to go into what is called the town and range. Every description that you see on a document should have a section number, a town, and a range. If it doesn't, it's really ambiguous. If somebody describes a piece of property by saying what section that it's in, but they don't say the township and range, that could be in any one of thousands of different places in the state of Michigan. When you give a description of a piece of property and you say it's in township number such and such, range number such and such, and section number such and such, those three numbers narrow the location of that property down to 1 square mile. There is one exception to that, and that's right down here. This is an area that's in Wayne and Macomb, and I think there's a little bit of it maybe in St. Clair County, if my memory's right. These are what are called private claims. The private claim situation arose based on an 1809 survey. And this was well before Michigan was established as a state. Michigan at the time was still a territory. And they hadn't formalized the land ownership or record system in Michigan at that time, but there were people that were staking out claims, homesteading, if you will, property along the Detroit River and the bottom of Lake St. Clair, right in this area here. These are called private claims. You're not going to see them anywhere else in the state, but they are there. And we'll get into that little detail here in just a second. But if you see all this crosshatching going on up here, we were talking a minute ago about townships and ranges and section numbers. In order to define the location of a piece of property, they had to make a determination as to a center point for the state. And in their infinite wisdom, they didn't put it, oh, gee, I might put it like right there somewhere, but nope, they put it way down here. And that is an area that's located at the intersection of Ingham, Livingston, Washtenaw, and Jackson counties, right here where you see this little blue box. For all intents and purposes in Michigan, this is the center point or the reference point by which everything else is measured. You're going to see where we got Michigan Center, we got Brooklyn, there's Ann Arbor, Charlotte, Lansing's up here, Fowlerville, Howell. This is the center point for the town and range system in the state of Michigan. Everything that is located north, this is called the baseline. The east to west line is called the baseline. Everything located north of it is a township north. This is township 1 north, 2 north, 3 north, 4 north. I think there are 68. I might have that number transposed, but there are 68 townships north of this point. And I think there are a total of 7 that are south. As you can see, it's not at all central. There's also what's called the Meridian Line, which runs north to south. It's not quite a true line. It runs a little bit to the northeast. Everything that's to the east of that is 1 east, 2 east, 3 east, and the same going west. 1, 2, 3, 4. So when you have a section, township, and range number, by the latter 2 of those, by the township and range, you can narrow it down to 36 square miles instantly. And then within that 36 square miles, you can further narrow it down to 1 square mile just by knowing what those 3 numbers are. Getting back really quickly to this private claim, unless you're dealing in property in these areas, I don't think you're ever going to see a private claim come up in a document. It's Wayne, Macomb, and I think a little bit of perhaps St. Clair. This is the survey that was done in 1809. This, keep in mind, was before Michigan was a state. Michigan was a territory at the time. Its boundaries were changing constantly. We even had a bloodless war with Ohio over Toledo, if you can believe that. So there were a number of, I don't know if you can see it if it comes through very well, but there are a lot of teeny little pieces of property in here that were all surveyed by a gentleman by the name of Aaron Greenlee in 1809 and 1810. These pre-existed all the other descriptions in property and before Michigan became a state in 1837. You're not likely to see these. If you do run into one of these, they're basically going to be described as a PC or private claim number. They're numbered, and then each private claim number will have a legal description, which is a long meets and bounds kind of description. Many of these private claims have since been subdivided, so you can see parcels that are part of a private claim. You may not know it, but Michigan's boundaries have in fact changed over the years. Originally, Michigan over here only had the eastern part of the Upper Peninsula. This is probably, oh geez, I'm going to guess that's maybe in the Newberry. We're probably talking about Manistee and maybe Newberry. Everything to the west was not part of Michigan at that time. The boundaries of the territory, again, were not a state at this point, we're just a territory, ended up including bigger areas, including Wisconsin, Minnesota, Dakotas. Michigan's territory at one point was fairly large. We did in 1836 have a disagree with Ohio about a little strip of land that was down here, and it included Toledo right there. What we got in exchange for giving them Toledo was the other western half of the Upper Peninsula. I think we did pretty good. Okay, so we've discussed that already. This is back again to the Township and Ranges. This is the approximate layout. If you're looking at a town and range, that the town is north and the range is west, that puts you in this quadrant of the state, and that includes the Upper Peninsula. There's a little bit of range east in the Upper Peninsula, parts of Chippewa County, and you're out here on a couple of the islands that are in the St. Mary's River up there. Everything else in the Upper Peninsula is north and west, north and east. Doesn't really necessarily follow. That might kind of roughly follow 27 a little bit, US 27. Southeast is considerably smaller, and the southwest, the southern tiers, as we said, are much smaller than the ones to the north. You can, of course, go to the 4 extreme corners of the state of Michigan. The very, very tippy top is town 68 north. It's the 68th township, the 36 square miles. It's the 68th tier north of the baseline down there by Ingham County. Of course, that puts you up on Isle Royale, which is so far off my map here that they put it in its own corner. It's so far you can see Alaska from there, and actually this is even north of Eric's house up there in Keweenaw County. Even Eric and Sue up there. This is even north of them. That's how far north this is. And now to the south, you've got 9 townships south again of this line here. And this point right here in Hillsdale County, you got Hoosiers on this side and Buckeyes on this side. And this is part of that. This is part of that strip. About 800 square miles is what they got in exchange for the western half of the UP. I've been out to this point before. It took this picture of what they call the tri-state point, and there's nothing there, not even a marker. You want to go as far east as you can go in the state of Michigan. That's out here in St. Clair County. They got Canadians on the other side of the river there. And as far west as you can go, way over here, this is the Montreal River. Separates the cheese people over on this side of the river from Michigan right here. And if you go that way a couple miles, that's where Sharon Hallberg lives, for those of you that have been around a little bit. We'll see how long this lasts. So we were at this point, we're talking now about townships in Michigan. Townships, there's something to keep in mind is that, and you'll have this discussion sometimes with people when you tell them that townships are 36 square miles. They're going to say, oh, no, it's not, because we've got this one over here that's like really big, or this one over here that's really small. There are two different phraseologies, if you will, for townships, and that's a political township, which is a township that has a supervisor and a town hall and things of that nature. And there's also a survey township, and they shouldn't be confused. In some places, they're very prevalent, common in the Upper Peninsula. You'll have a political township, which can be 2, 3, or even 4 survey townships. They can be much larger than 36 square miles. But a survey township is what we're talking about here. Something that you're going to want to keep an eyeball on when you're dealing with a legal description or looking at one on a document is make sure that it has a township, a range, and a section number. As I said before, that's going to narrow the location of any piece of property that's described down to 1 square mile if the section number is given. If it doesn't have the town and range number, just has a section number and a township name, that isn't going to do you a lot good if the township itself consists of more than one survey township. So that's kind of a check you might want to do on legal descriptions, is make sure that it has township, range, and section number in the description. Townships in Michigan are 6 miles square, and they have, I don't know why, there's probably a reason that you could look up, but the numbering starts at the upper right-hand corner and goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and drops down 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It runs in an unusual kind of a zigzag pattern. I don't know why, but that is the way that it's done. They're generally 6 square miles. Each square mile, as we'll get into in a minute, has standard measurement. However, because the earth is not flat, at least to most people, the earth has curvature, and therefore at some points they have to make up for that.
Marty, some people are having trouble hearing you. Can you speak up a little bit, please?
I'm speaking about as loud, I think, as I can.
Is this better for the folks that messaged me? Yes, it's better. Thanks, Marty.
Okay.
I think it may have to do whether you're facing the mic or not when you're talking.
It probably does, but I can't. I guess I could probably try to talk to the screen while I'm looking at this. Anyway, because the earth is curved, they do at some point have to deviate from everything being square to make up for that curvature. And that is done in what they call fractional sections. So if you see a section of land described with the abbreviation FL, that lets you know right away that you're dealing in a fractional section, and it's not necessarily going to be square. Your 5-acre piece may be something a little bit less than 5 acres for that reason. We'll give you some examples of that as well. A square mile is 640 acres in a non-fractional section. The fractional sections are fairly uncommon. I think probably every county is going to have a few here and there, but for the most part, probably 99% of what you're dealing with is going to be a statutory square township and a square mile. The measurement is going to be 5,280 feet on each side of your square mile. And that is going to calculate out to being 640 acres. And it's going to be very uncommon for you to see a property described that is a large property, something over perhaps 5 acres or 10 acres. It's going to be very uncommon for you to see a very large property described other than by a derivative sort of description as these. Now, something to keep in mind too is that not all 5 or 10 acre parcels are square. They're going to be rectangular. They're going to be some of them, even though they might be in a rounded number of acres, they might have an unusual configuration. And
Marty,
we'll
some
show you-
folks are still having an issue hearing you.
then they're going to have to turn up their speakers because I'm speaking as loud as I can.
Can you sit at an angle facing the computer a little bit at all?
Not unless I move this whole board over here, which at this point is going to be really difficult. Let me see if I can change microphones. Does that make a difference? I just changed it. Does that make a difference for people?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess maybe I switch to microphones to the one in this cam right here. Maybe that'll help a lot.
That's
Anyway,
much better.
so here's another little thing that you're gonna run into from time to time when you're dealing with legal descriptions. And these are often abbreviated as GL. A GL is a government lot. And when you see a government lot included in a description of a piece of real estate, you can almost guarantee that you are dealing with a piece of property that fronts on water or something that has a swampland or something that has some kind of a boundary that made it very difficult to survey. Keep in mind that when the original surveys of these parcels were done, that they didn't have, they couldn't drive out there in their new Chevy Suburban with all their fancy tools and take their ATV out to the edge of the water. These guys were miles from any kind of an improved road, and they were out setting the corner markers for the section. For each square mile, they'd go out there and set these corners, and then they would go set the quarter corners. They would go out and set these and survey everything and map it. And what became very difficult is when they got into these areas that were marshy or that had shorelines maybe that changed and moved. It became very difficult for them with any degree of accuracy to describe these. So what they would do is for each quarter section, this a quarter is 40 acres. And we'll get into some of that in a minute here as well. They would within these areas, they would call, as an example, this is a 40-acre piece here. They might describe this in quarters and consider these two whole, but these they might call them a government lot and also a government lot here because of the water issues here making surveying difficult. So if you run into a government lot or a GL number, that tells you that you're near water, and they're numbered by the quarter section. So you have a government lot 1, there's going to be a number 2 in here somewhere, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So there's government lot 2 there. If you had government lots over here as well, they would also be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a counterclockwise designation from the northeast corner. Anytime that you're trying to read a legal description, such as this, you'll see descriptions like this often used in a document. The simplest way to read this, and you're always going to want to have a little bit of scrap paper kind of laying around, something you can recycle later. But you're always going to start out with, this is your square mile. These are your quarters. And then these are your quarters. So you're going to have a northeast, a northwest, a southwest, and a southeast. Now, the way that you read these descriptions like this is from the back end. You're gonna take a look at this. You're going to know that it's in the southwest quarter, which is here. It's going to be the north half, which puts you north of this line in the southwest quarter, and then it's the north half of that. So because this is 40 acres and that's 40 acres, and you're dealing with the north half of, so that's 80 acres, you're dealing with the north half, that's going to give you 20 acres. So that's how you read these descriptions, is from the back. Southwest puts you down the southwest, southwest of the southeast, excuse me, southeast of the south. So you're in the southwest quarter here, then you're moving up, you're in the southeast portion of it, which is this part right here. And then you're dealing with the west half of that. This is 40 acres, that's 20. So that's how you would navigate through this type of a description, is by starting at the end of it, drawing yourself a map on a piece of paper of your whole section, dividing it up to quarters and then quarters. It's a pretty simple, actually, after you've done it a few times. Meander points. We were talking about the government lots here a second ago. Because water boundaries move or are indeterminate because of things like swamps, they often will create points on the land that are above the actual edge of the water. Those are called meander points or meander lines. And those are going to be a point that they know that they could get to and set a survey marker on solid land that they knew is never going to be submerged. And then between those points, they would draw a line, which again is not necessarily the edge of the water, but they would draw a line and they would call it the meander line. Now, generally speaking, in a piece of property that is in a government lot, or even a piece of property that's waterfront, if there's a meander point and a meander line, the person who owns the property does own to the center of the waterway. They do own the land between the meander to the center point of the waterway, with some exceptions, man-made lakes, things of that nature. So that's, if you run into government lots, meander lines, meander points, at that point, you're pretty certain you're dealing with a waterfront piece of property. Riparian rights, which is the right to the land under the water, to use a pun, can get really muddy. So we're not even going to get into that today. You are going to run into, in your descriptions, things called section lines, quarter lines, and 16th lines and corners. Those are, again, something that once you are familiar with the phraseology, they're no longer a mystery. The section lines, now this is these map sheets that some of you have that you got from us are scaled to be used with a 20 or 40 acre kind of a description, but you can just scribble that out and use it as a square map for an entire 1 square mile section. The section lines are the ones to the north, west, south, and east. If you divide it into quarters, if you take your square mile and divide it into quarters, those are called the quarter lines because you have created 4 quarters. If you then divide it further, divide each quarter into quarters, those are then the 16th lines. This is called the west 16th line, the east 16th line, the north and the south 16th line. And then you've got your north and south and east and west quarter lines. So if you see reference to those in a legal description, that's what they're talking about. A quarter of a quarter is 40 acres. It's unlikely that you're going to see any long description of a parcel that's larger than 40 acres that isn't described, as we saw a little earlier, when we showed this type of a description. When they're calling it out by the quarter or quarter or halves of a quarter or quarter, you're dealing in parcels smaller than 40 acres generally with these types of descriptions, but they can include them larger pieces also. When you see something that's long description, the meets and bounds kind of descriptions that we're here to show you how to map today, those kinds of descriptions are generally going to be parcels less than 40 acres in size, which is why they've created this kind of a sheet to help you map these things out. Now, there are a couple of numbers that if you're dealing with land descriptions, you should always, you might want to write this down and put it on a little sticky note and tape it somewhere or bury it inside your head. The acre. The acre has been the basic description or unit of land for a long time, since like the 1500s. An acre of land, regardless of its boundaries or its shape or any other factor, the square footage of an acre is always going to be 43,560 square feet. So if you know that number, which is this is your unit of measure, then you're going to have your other factors coming into play, which are the lengths of your boundaries. If you know the measurements of your two sides, if you're dealing with a square or a rectangular piece of land, which most are, you can always calculate the number of acres pretty quickly. Where it's difficult is where the sides, where the corners are at angles more or less than 90 degrees, or the sides are of different lengths, or if it is not square or rectangular, it's octagonal or trapezoidal or something, you're still going to be able to calculate it by the square footage as to the number of acres, but you may not be able to do the reverse, which is determine some of the missing dimensions. So if you've got a, do I have a calculator here? Did I prepare for that? Maybe I didn't. If you have, I've got a phone. I'll let you guys do this part at home. If you have a piece of property that is 100 feet wide and let's say that it's 200 feet deep, if you multiply that 100-foot width by that 200-foot depth, that's going to give you 20,000 square feet. If you multiply that into 43,560, that's going to tell you that you're just shy of half an acre. That's going to give you a decimal calculation that's going to tell you that your property is about 4/10 of an acre or so. So you can always, by using known numbers and by using the 43,560 number as your basic standard of rule for an acre, you can always figure out what your missing dimensions are, what your acreage calculation is, things of that nature. Conversely, if you have a piece of property that you know is 5 acres and you know that it's 200 feet wide, if you divide 200 into 43,560, that'll tell you what the depth of your sides is. So you can usually determine a missing variable by using the 43,560 along with your known variables and then just doing a little bit of math back and forth. So there's a bunch of different ways that land can be described in a document. One that we're not going to get into very much today is platted or subdivided lands. This obviously was done to make this whole process very simple. If you're dealing with lot number 4 of John Smith's subdivision, it is what it is. It's already drawn on a plat map. The boundaries are there. It's not difficult. They're all registered. The plats have been approved. They're filed with the Register of Deeds. The state's got a copy of them. That stuff's real easy to document and figure out. One derivation of that is something that's called the assessor's plat. They were also at times called the supervisor's plat. And this is a situation where at some point in the past, John Q. property owner maybe owned a 10-acre piece of property, and he had a bunch of kids, and he wanted to give each one of his kids a part of that property, but he never went through the formal process of subdividing it. So what he might have done is he might have gone out and said, okay, well, I'm going to, son number one, I'm going to give you the property that starts at that rock and goes over to that tree, and then it goes that way, and then it goes over here, and then it goes that way a few feet, and then it comes back. So that's going to be your piece of property. And then daughter number one, starting at that tree where his property ends, you're going to go that way 50 feet, and then you're going to go back that way at a certain angle. So they would sometimes laymen carving up property before subdividing was required for doing such things would create some real monsters. And these would be carried forward in land descriptions and sometimes would cause a lot of issues, especially if things like rocks were moved or trees died. So what they came up with was the legal ability for the assessor, which often was the supervisor of a political township, to be able to go into one and say, okay, this is a little ambiguous. These descriptions aren't very good. So what we're going to do is we're going to have this property surveyed, and this piece of property that you gave to son number one, from now on, is going to be called supervisor's plat, and they would usually number them. Sometimes the supervisor or assessor would get their name enshrined in the name of the plat, but they would say from now on, that's lot number one of the supervisor or assessor's plat number 92, or assessor John Smith's assessor's plat number 14, lot number one, and they would eliminate going forward the necessity of having to describe these by long measure and by monuments that may or may not still be there. So a lot of the necessity of those went away when they created the Subdivision Control Act in 1967, but you're still going to see these occasionally in documents, and you're going to recognize the abbreviation AP of assessor's plat, or SP for supervisor's plat, usually followed by a number, AP number 14, lot 6. You probably are not going to, again, after they've been so described, they're usually going to discontinue that earlier long description that was very confusing. But you will, on occasion in your documents, see supervisor's plats or assessor's plats, and that's what those are. It's somebody in the past cleaning up a messy or ambiguous legal description. As I mentioned before, when you get into your descriptions of land of acreage parcels, they're going to be described a lot of times something like this. It's the east half of the northeast of the southwest of the southwest. And you read these in reverse. Figure out where your southwest is. That's this. And then the southwest of the southwest is this. And the northeast of the southwest is this. And the east half of it is right there. And you've got your 5 acres. So division, land sections, just read them, read the descriptions in reverse. And again, just keep yourself a handy little piece of paper so that you can plot out where it is. And it makes it very easy to deduce those very quickly. This is on, by the way, one of the tools that if you got the package from us, you got one of these handy dandy little gizmos right here. That's what that is right there. And it'll give you down here some scale measurement, and on the backside, handy dandy conversion between your 66-foot chains being 4 rods. So if you do run into chains and rods, you can convert those to feet really easily with this little tool that's right there for you. I touched a little bit on this a couple seconds ago. Let's say that you run into a description that says that a piece is the east 7 acres of the southwest of the southwest. Well, you know that the southwest corner, the southwest quarter, the southwest of the southwest, you know by looking at this, the southwest of the southwest would be the same size as the southwest of the southeast. You're dealing with a quarter, And unless it's a fractional section, that's 40 acres. So if you need to determine what the actual size of the east 7 acres of that is, 7 out of 40, what you know already by standard is that a 40 acre piece is 1,320 feet square. So if you take 7 acres and you know that your 1 acre dimension is 43,560 square feet, there's that number again. If you multiply 7 by 43,560, you're going to know that you have 304,920 square feet in your 7 acres. You know that your 40 acre piece is 1,320 feet square. If you divide 1,320 into your 304,920, you're going to come up with 231 feet, which is going to be the width of your property. You're going to know that it's 1,320 feet in one dimension and 231 feet in the other dimension. Again, by keeping the 43,560 square feet in an acre number available to you, and use that when you do know parts of your land boundary measurements, you can always deduce what the balance of those measurements are. Conversely, if all you know is the boundaries, and you know that a piece is 660 by 330 feet, because you've sat down and mapped it out a little bit, you can tell that's what it is. You multiply those, you come up with 217,800 square feet. Divide it by, there's that number again, you've got 5 acres. Okay, now the hairy part. Everybody gets some of these. These come into your office and you're looking at this and you're thinking, my golly, what is that? Somebody went to some length here to describe a square piece of property, but we'll tell you how and why they did it. You're going to see abbreviations when you're dealing with long description of land. This is called meets and bounds. That's the technical term for a long description like this. And you're going to see things in here like com and int and the and cont, and there's your government lot. This one's waterfront. You're going to see abbreviations in here that once you know the language, they're not difficult. So every piece of property is going to have a commencement point, which is not necessarily where the property itself begins. It's a beginning of the description, but not necessarily of the property itself. ALG, when you see it, is going to be along. It's going to be along a road. It's going to be along a river. It's going to be along a boundary. Point of beginning. When you start or begin or commence your description, you're going to be starting at a reference point. You're going to be starting at a known quantity. Generally speaking, it's going to be a corner or the center of a section. It's going to be a known monumented point. Then you're going to go from that point by a long description of distance and measurement of angles. You're going to go from your beginning point, or excuse me, from your commencement or beginning point to your point of beginning. The beginning point and the point of beginning are two different things, and we'll discuss that in just a second. This is parallel. It can be a line that is parallel to another line. CL is center line. Again, that can be the center line of a road. It can also be the center line of a river. Generally speaking, in long description property that's out in the country somewhere, property ownership goes to the center of the road. If the road runs along a section line, or if it's a public road and it runs along a 16th line, a quarter line, or a section line, generally speaking, acreage parcels are owned to the center of the road, and the government then has a right-of-way over 33, 66, sometimes 50 feet of property for the establishment and maintenance of the road. So you'll often see property described as going to the center line of a road. Radius and chords, we'll talk about those at the end. This is when you're dealing with a piece of property, generally speaking, that is on sometimes on a river, but generally it's going to be on a road that has a curve to it. It doesn't necessarily follow a north, south, east, west, or any other kind of a straight line. And EXC is accept. This is something that probably should not even be allowed in a legal description. And I'll show you a really good example in a little bit. Sometimes what our friends in the assessing departments do is they'll have a piece of property and somebody will split it. And rather than creating two new descriptions, they will take the existing description and say, well, it's that piece of property except for this piece that got sold. It's a really kind of a lazy way of doing it, but it's done far too often. We'll show you an
Just a
example.
warning, I think we might have an assessor or two on the Zoom, so.
Okay, we're talking about the bad ones, and they know who those are. So they should be teaching this class instead of me, probably. So going back to this description, here's the real simple way to deal with these. When you look at this, it gets a little confusing because you kind of got everything here mushed together. The easiest way to deal with this is, if you have the ability to do so, get this copied into some kind of a word processing app, and then go through this, and every place you see this, which is then, every time that you see then, that's a different part of the description. You're basically changing direction and going a new distance. So what you do with this is you put it in your word processor, and every time you see then, you make it a new line, just like it is on here. Once you've done that, this whole process gets so much easier. So here we're dealing with a piece of property that commences at the intersection of the line of Old State Road, I'm going to guess is what that is, and the south line of Government Lot 1. So this is your reference point. This is telling you where your description is going to start. And this is the intersection of the Old State Road and the south line of Government Lot 1 is going to be something that's not going to be difficult for you to find on a tax map. Then you're going to go northwesterly along the road, 97 feet. There's your point of beginning. That's where this piece of property starts. Everything before your point of beginning is basically how to get to where the property description starts. Once you know where you're starting, then you're continuing along the road another 66 feet. Then you're going west to the west line of that government lot. Again, this will be shown on your tax maps where your government lot is for the most part. Sometimes they're not there, but they should be. Then south along the west line of that government lot to a point 50 feet north of the south line. Then you're going northeasterly to the point of beginning. You should be able to draw this out so that when you start at this point of beginning and end at the point of beginning, everything touches. It's called closure. You should have reached a point where the box that you've drawn, you're not 500 feet apart somehow. It's all based on scale and direction, measurement of land and direction. We talked at the very beginning about compass. This is an example of what is used in survey work. You'll notice there's no 360 degrees on here. What you have in land description is really two directions, two primary directions, and those are north and south. And most of you will have one of these handy little digits. And if you don't have one of these, this is something you want in your desk if you're going to be dealing with these long descriptions. Without this, you're only really estimating, and you're probably never going to get your little sketch to close. So what you're going to see and notice on here is that north and south both are at 0 degrees. Those are absolute directions. North and south, 0 degrees. If you're going straight north, all you have to say is north. South is the same thing. East and west actually can be described strictly as east and west if they are at absolute 90 degrees to the north and south. Once you are into any kind of an angle where your property boundary is going off on a tangent of any kind, you're going to have to describe what that angle is. You're not going to be doing it by using the old compass nomenclature, which is going to get you 110, 120 down to 180 acre or 180 degrees. You're going to be going in quadrants of 90 degrees. You're going to be, everything that's up here is going to be north and west, north and east, south and west, south and east. You're always going to have your primary direction first. Your secondary direction is going to be second. So let's dissect this one. Here's one that you might, this is typical of what you're going to see in a legal description. You're always going to have your primary direction first, your secondary one second. You're going to see 3 numbers here. Sometimes it's just the one. Sometimes it's going to be north 89 degrees west or whatever. You've got 3 elements to this description, actually a 4th one. This is degrees. These are whole degrees. There are 90 of them, 90 whole degrees between 0 and 90. This is telling you, here's what you're going to look at right off the bat. You're going to look at north and west. Then you go to your compass here, north and west. North 89 degrees west is going to make your angle that you're going in this direction here. You're 1 degree north of being 90 degrees west. The other consideration here, and we'll get to it in a second, is a line that is north 89 degrees west can also be described as being south 89 degrees east. It depends on which direction you are drawing your line from, or where your beginning of the line that you're drawing is. So I'll show you examples of that on a survey here in a second. These 2 second numbers here, this is a whole degree. This is what's called a minute, and this is what's called a second. Every degree has 60 minutes and 60 seconds. We're talking about hairline little differences. We're talking about splitting one of these degrees right here. We're talking about just splitting that into 60 and then splitting those into 60. That's surveyor territory. We're not dealing with that. So anytime that you see these, for our purposes, we're not surveying the property. We're just trying to figure out generally what it is. Just forget those. Just take those right out of your consideration. North, 89 degrees west, 214 feet. South, 1 degree east, 104 feet. So you can take this, and with your north 89 degrees west, you know that you're going over here, 89 degrees, so that if you were starting here, this is the direction your line's taking. Then you're going to get out your scale ruler and figure out how long your line is. And then once you get to that spot, you're going to, so you've made your 89 degrees west, you've gone your 214 feet, then you're going south, because again, we have gone through the description and parsed it out line by line. This one doesn't have any angles to it. These are all just straight measurements, south, west, northwesterly along a road as a reference point. But we'll show you one in a minute that does. But you've gotten to this point by going north 89 degrees west. Here's your 214 feet. Then you want to go south 1 degree east. You're gonna take your little center point of this scale right here and put it at the end of that last line that you wrote. and make sure that you're going north and west, which is what you're using your map paper for. And you're going to go south 1 degree east. So here we are, we're going south. East is over here. So you're going to go 1 degree past there. And that's going to be the bearing of your line. So there's your line. And you're going to take your scale ruler and come down 100 feet, 104.16 feet. So that's how these longer descriptions are mapped out. And we'll show you one of these in a little bit more detail here in just a second. So here's a longer one that does include some of these bearings and distances, and we're going to map this out. Just so if everybody has hands-on one of these one time, they become a whole lot simpler. One thing to make a note of here, this particular description is in 2 different sections. So it crosses a section line. And I didn't put that there intentionally. I grabbed a random legal and put this in there. But so we're going to do now what I suggested you do earlier, which is we're going to copy this into a word processing program, and then we're going to parse it. We're looking for all the thens. Every time you've got a then, you're starting a new line. It's going to tell you your direction. It's going to tell you your distance. And then you're going to start a new direction and a new distance, a new direction, a new distance, until you come all the way around from your point of beginning at the start. You're coming all the way back around to exactly that same place. So I did mention that directions can be opposite. When you're writing a legal as opposed to mapping one out, every legal description that is written should have a point of reference. That is a beginning or a commencement point. This is a copy off a survey. And you'll notice here that they use as their starting point the southeast corner of Government Lot 5. It's monumented. It's already got a stake at it. If a surveyor needs to find it, they can. Now, once you have begun at this point, the surveyor is going to be going north 89 degrees west, which is pretty much west, but it's not exactly west, 853 feet. They're going to this part here. Then they're going north 1 degree east and a little few fractionalities there to get to your point of beginning, commencement point or beginning point to another point, to the point of beginning of the description itself. What you're going to notice here, and what I want to point out so that you don't get confused by this if you're ever looking at one of these, you'll notice that this line is north 8 degrees east, and this one is south 3 degrees west. And you're thinking to yourself, well, gee, they both kind of run the same angle. What's up with that? Why aren't they described the same way? What's going on here is because this is the point of beginning of our description. The person that wrote this description and surveyed it, essentially what their task is to describe each one of these lines and come all the way back around to this point of beginning. So what you're seeing here by this north here and the south here is the direction in which that line is being mapped. It's going north, it's going northeast, it's going northwest, it's going northeast, now it's going southeast, and finally it's going southwest all the way back to this road. So even though you see a north here and a south over here, that shouldn't confuse you into thinking that for some reason this thing is wildly off. It's mostly from where the point is that the surveyor has found himself at and the direction that he's going at that point in his mapping. So again, he's starting at his point of beginning. He's going north, north, northwest, northeast, southeast, southwest, and then to the northwest to get back to his point of beginning. So that's why the directions can appear to be opposite. It's just the travel of the description itself in order to close the description and again reach the end of that description. Okay, so this is the description we had a little earlier here. It's in 2 sections. we're discovering here pretty in the first line, our commencement point. It's going to tell us where we're going to start our mapping, where we're going to start drawing. This is telling us that we're starting at the northwest corner of the southwest of the southwest. So this is our section 5 map. This is the whole square mile. You're always going to want to start out again by taking a piece of scrap paper and figuring out where in that square mile you are. So you know that you're in the southwest of the southwest. That's this one right here. You can find that if you aren't quite familiar with that description yet. Again, go back to your reference maps here. Your southwest is going to be here, and the southwest of the southwest is going to be here. This is west, this is south. So that puts you right back into this quadrant right here. And it's telling you that you're starting at the northwest corner of it, which is right there. So now you have your point of commencement. You're starting at your northwest corner of the southwest of the southwest. Because you have parsed your legal description like this, as opposed to looking at it like that, which is certainly a lot more confusing. Once you got it parsed out like this, it becomes pretty simple to follow. So now you've got your commencement point. It's telling you then to go south 0 degrees west, which is pretty much straight south, but a little bit to the west. South 0 degrees. Again, your minutes and your sections, forget them. Don't even worry about them. I mean, if you're doing a survey, yeah, they're important. For our purposes, we're gonna end up so close that we're gonna call it closed. So you're going south 0 degrees west, 20 feet. That's this little distance right here if you're mapping this out. So you're gonna get your mapping paper here. There's your northwest corner. You're gonna put your compass right on that. You're going to line up your 0 degree line with this edge right here. And then you're going south 0 degrees west. I mean, that's pretty much straight south. So you're going to be following that line and you're going to be going 20 feet. Your scale for a quarter section is 200 feet to an inch. So 20 feet is a very small, so this would be 200 feet. You're going 1/10 of that. That is it's gonna be a very small little on my minute amount right there on your map. So you've gone south. It's telling you that you've gone south 20 feet to the south line of a 20-foot wide private road. So what this description is telling us is that right here is a private road, and 20 feet of it is in this quarter section, and that might be the entire width of the road, maybe 20 feet. So it's getting you to that point as the point of beginning of your description. Then you're going to go to the next line. The next line says then you're going north 89 degrees east along that road 123 feet. Get your scale back out again. 1 inch is 200 feet, so 123 feet is going to put you right about there. So you've gone north 89 degrees east, 123 feet along that road. You can map this out along with us. The next line, here we are again, south 0 degrees. We've got some little bit of noise in there for minutes and seconds. We're not going to worry about it. That's essentially telling us that we're going south 0 degrees. We've got everything lined up again here. There's our south. We're going south 0 degrees, 150 feet. We'll put that there just for reference. And we're going to go, that's 100 and there's 150. Now we're going south 89 degrees west. Again, we get the compass out. We make sure that we're right in the middle of that, that our lines are nice and straight with what's on the map. We're going that way. I mean, essentially here we are again going pretty much straight west, and we're going a distance of 123.89 feet, which is going to be just short of 1 point. And what you're going to notice here, as I mentioned, this particular parcel is in 2 different sections. This is the this is section 5 over here. Section 6 is next door. So we're going 123 feet, and that basically is taking us to the section line. In the next description, we're continuing. You'll see that we're continuing in the same general direction, 89 degrees west, but we're changing from south to north just ever so remotely, just ever so slightly. And you'll notice that pretty much this is again straight to the west, but one of them is 89. This is south 89 degrees. The difference between these 2 lines is the difference between there and there as far as your direction. It's very slight. But you're basically continuing, even though that's south and that's north, they're 89 degrees west. You're pretty much heading in the same direction, a distance of 27.3 feet, which is just short of 3 on your scale, into section 6. Then you're going north 0 degrees. Again, you've got a little bit of minutes and seconds noise there that we can overlook for the moment. You're going 150 feet. To the south line of that private road. Then 89 degrees east, again, because you're dealing in something that's so close to 90, you almost don't really need that, and you can disregard, for our purposes, the minutes and seconds. They're so minute you wouldn't be able to, unless you really blew the scale of this map up, it wouldn't make any difference to you anyway. So you're then going to the east 27 feet, which is going to put you right there. And you're right back at your point of beginning. So that's essentially how you map. You start at your reference point or your commencement point or your beginning point. It's going to take you to something that it should call a POB or a point of beginning. Then you're going to use your, unless it, and if it just calls for north, south, east, and west, you just follow the lines on this graph paper. Use your scale. You should be able to close your description. You should be able to come around and follow all of these angles and these distances, and you should end up where you began. If you didn't, either you misconstrued something in your interpretation here and drew it wrong. What I've done a whole bunch of times is just simply gone the wrong direction, gone east instead of west on something, and before I know it, I'm like 5 miles from where I'm supposed to be. But if you come back and check your math, so to speak, you'll usually catch up on it. Or option number 2 is your description itself is just bad. And those happen more often than we'd like to realize. So at this point, we've come all the way back around. We've reached the end. We've returned to our point of beginning. This is what's called closure. This is a piece of property that the description properly closes on. So you've got that. We're almost done. I did want to throw this one in just for an example of the kind of thing that I hope none of you ever have to deal with. This is one that we inherited via tax foreclosure. I'm not going to say where it is in case anybody that has anything to do with this might happen to be watching, but I've never run into one quite like this before. We foreclosed on what you see outlined here in the highlighter. And the legal description to the piece of property was horrendous. That's part of it. And that's the rest of it. So if you want to talk about something that's kind of a nightmare to decipher, it's right here. It could have been, and actually I think eventually was, made much simpler. The thing that makes this so difficult is I talked earlier about parcels where somebody will list an exception. They'll take a piece of property, and then when something is sold, they'll accept it from the legal description and just keep on running. In this situation, you're going to see a whole bunch of lots here and here, and some other small pieces of property in a few spots. Well, there's one here, and there's a couple of them in here. And they took what was a larger piece of property and kept describing it that way by making exceptions rather than rewriting the description. In this particular description, there were 39 exceptions in here that we had to go through and kind of ferret out. And then we went all the way back through it. And again, by doing what we said earlier, putting the description into a word processing program and parsing it, we actually were able to reduce it to this, which makes it a little easier to look at, but it's still not very simple to describe. So after we got to this point, we went back to our original map, wherever that ended up at, and eliminated all of these exceptions and actually just followed the map itself. Discovered where our point of beginning was, and then literally just followed the survey and described each direction. The direction north 89 degrees, 37, 51 west, however many feet, and actually cleaned up that description, and now it looks like that. There are a couple of things in here where there were distances that we had to refine, but we essentially got to the point where we were able to turn this into that. And it's just a whole lot easier on the eyes and a whole lot easier to digest. One last thing before we leave today. Sometimes you're going to get into a piece of property where you're going to see a description of a curve. And a lot of times they're going to say a radius curve of a 14 foot blah, blah, blah to the right. What they're often going to throw you in there as a very helpful thing is something called the chord. So we're going back to one of those things you learned in high school that you never thought you'd need again the rest of your life. The chord will save you a lot of time. If you're ever in a description and it's talking about a curve, they're going to give you a radius, which is basically telling you how it's half, the radius is half of the diameter of the circle. They're telling you how big the circle is as far as what its scale is to the whole. And then they're going to give you a really neat way to cheat, which is the chord. And chord is different from the radius in that what it's essentially going to do is it's not going to tell you how big the circle is. but the chord is going to tell you where the other side of this curve is going to end. So that rather than having to sit down and draw this whole circle out and try to slide it into your description and describe all this, you're actually going to be able to just cheat and go from wherever it is that they're telling you to start at, and they're telling you where you're going to end without making you go through the mechanics of this. Generally speaking, on curves that are on maps, they're very, very seldom going to be very tight, very sharp angles. They're generally speaking going to be very, very sweeping, very little. They're going to be more along the lines of this on a piece of property than they are likely to be like this. So when they give you a chord, if you're here, what they're essentially telling you is that you're going to end up here and giving you a straight line and a distance between those 2 points, as opposed to trying to describe that curve itself. So if you see radiuses, diameters, and chords, pay attention to the chord, because unless you're dealing with something that's got a really tight curve to it, if it's a sweeping curve like this, the chord is a way to cheat and complete your description accurately, although you're not going to have every nuance of the exact sweep of that curve. It's going to get you from point A to point B so that you can keep on with your description. So those are some of the points that I wanted to make that I think are going to be of help. Again, a couple of things that I think are really important is that when you get a legal description through your office, make sure that it's got a town, range, and section number. That's going to narrow that piece of property down to 1 square mile in the state of Michigan. Keep that 43,560 in mind. If you see pieces that are 33 or 66 feet wide by 660 or 1,320 or 5,280 feet in length, but they're 33 feet wide, keep in mind you may very well be dealing with a private road, not a public road, and those could be things that eliminate access to people's property. So always kind of keep those in mind. Do we have any questions?
The chat is silent right now, but I'm sure there are some.
If anybody has questions, unless I've run everybody away, how many people do we still have tuned in?
98 people still watching.
I swear you people must have nothing else to do on a Wednesday afternoon. If anybody has questions or needs any clarification on anything, or if there's something that you see in your county that you think is weird, fire it and we'll take a look at it. And maybe we'll go back and try to clean up the recording, the audio, and all of that stuff.
Marty, are you using 20 or 40 for scale?
I'm using the 20 because it's telling me that it's 200 feet to an inch. That's an inch, and 2 is going to give me half an inch is going to be 100 feet. That's using this tablet, and that's the scale it's giving me right there. 200 feet to 1 inch. And that's a quarter, which is good. That's going to make this 40 acres. You can also use this map for a quarter section, which is going to make 400 feet to an inch, which is the other side of this. If you wanted to, if you've got to see, this piece this is roughly an acre. Actually, it's smaller than an acre. If you're dealing with something that's a few acres in size, 4, 5, 8, 10 acres, you might want to be working on a map. If you were trying to scale it this way, you're going to end up with a box that's this big, and it's mighty tough to draw. So you could, even if you had a 10 scale, you could call this, you could actually make this, you could actually scale it to just this part of this section, and then then your box would be even bigger. So it's all about what you're comfortable in working with. as it pertains to the size of, if you know how big the piece of property is that you have to map out, and a lot of times they will clue you in on that at the end of the description or somewhere in it. Let me see if I can find the one we were working on here. I just was kind of throwing stuff. See, in this description here, they told us it's half an acre. They told us that right at the top. So you're not going to want to work on 160 acre scale. 40 acre was already a little tight. If you went quarter, that would have made this whole box 10 acres if you went to 100 feet to an inch.
Marty, next question. I have seen some deeds without a range. However, they would have a section or township. Is that normal?
If they say a section, or if they say a township name, like the Township of Smith, the problem is that this is not as prevalent as it is downstate as it is, especially in the western end of the Upper Peninsula. I know that there are townships, there are political townships in Ontonagon County, as an example, that have more than one range and more than one township number. So if they're saying that it's in, Berglund Township in Ontonagon County, but it's in section number and it's in a certain township by name, but they're not getting a township north and a range west number, that could be ambiguous enough that you might end up creating a twice assessed situation or really seriously screwing up somebody's title to their property. So when you see a description come through your office, especially at certification, you really want to be focused on section, township, range. That's going to narrow it down to a square mile, which, if nothing else, is going to decrease the potential for you to have an accident of it just being completely way off. And again, reciting a township name is not that's a political local unit of government. A survey township is 36 square miles, and there can be 1, 2, 3, 4. I think there might even be some political townships in the Upper Peninsula that might have 5 or parts of 5 sections and towns in them. You've also got to consider that there are places in Chippewa County where we're in that, and I've run into this before, and believe me, because I'm out looking at auction property and I end up 30 miles in the wrong place, and I got the treasurer call me that the sign's in the wrong place, that you run into, you might be in town 62 north, but you've got a range 2 east and a range 2 west, and they're 30 miles apart from each other. So you really have to not only pay attention to those when you're out looking at the property, but you really need to have those in the description. You can be in the same political township and not be in the same survey township. So I would be very watchful, very careful when I see descriptions come through to make sure they have section, township, and range in them, and not township by name, township by number, and north or south.
Before I read the next question, I want to say I did put my email address in the chat if anyone would like a copy of the slides and doesn't have them. The next question is, on the 20 scale, does 1 mean 100 feet?
Yes. If you're using it in a quarter section, right here, 200 feet to an inch. So that's 1 inch, and that's 200 feet. So 1 means 100, that's 300, 400. A quarter section is 40 acres is going to be 1,320 feet square. So if you start there, they get you 1320s right there. So yep. And if you were using this paper for a quarter section, which is 160 acres, that's going to get you to 2,640 feet, which on your 40 scale is 2,640 feet. So this tool right here is designed to use with this paper. either as a 40 acre on this scale or on 160 acres for that scale.
If anyone needs mapping supplies, we will share the name of our vendor and their contact information as well.
It's right there.
It's also right there.
This, by the way, this is a Michigan company. They're down Metro Detroit, near they started out, I think, in Washtenaw County. And this was run by this really cute, old couple. We're talking analog people, that I think started selling this stuff in probably the 40s. And this has always just kind of been the Cadillac, if you will. This is the Doubleday typewriter legal documents of mapping stuff. And the old folks finally passed away. And the company, at least last I knew, was owned by one of their daughters. And she was just going to let it go. I don't think she ever really grasped what she had. And then she absolutely just got beat up by people, you know, hey, we need this. You know, everybody's like, well, we'll just use computer. Everybody was starting to get really beat up by needing this stuff. So she now, I think it's her full-time career now, is carrying on mom and dad's business of basically selling paper. Now, the other thing too is there are software applications for mapping, and I've used them, and I know a couple of our managers here in the office have used them. We find them to be extremely difficult. They're just not, they're not intuitive. They're just not all that friendly or helpful. This is just so much. So once you understand how all of this stuff works together, there's no reason to try to use the computer anymore. This just, and as you're doing this, you can, this is just, to me anyway, maybe it's because I'm old, but this is just seems to be the easiest way to do it.